Play what happened. The outcome is in a...
The Psycho Killer movie reimagines the classic psychological horror concept for a new generation, blending atmospheric dread with a character-driven study of fear, identity, and obsession. This story doesn't rely on cheap shocks or jump scares alone. It uses silence, pacing, and the slow unraveling of a fractured mind to build tension that feels both intimate and inexorable. At its core, it asks unsettling questions about what it means to confront an evil that is not just external, but internal, a blurred line between victim, observer, and the monster that hides in the shadows of one's own mind. The opening moments place the audience in an environment that feels eerily ordinary: quiet streets at dusk, houses with lights switching on at irregular rhythms, the distant hum of a city that never fully sleeps. Nothing about the world seems overtly threatening yet, and this normalcy becomes the backdrop against which dread grows. There's something about familiarity that makes fear more unsettling, because it suggests the horror could be everywhere. Hidden beneath the surface of everyday life, the story revolves around a small community, rattled by a series of inexplicable events. At first, the incidents are subtle: a chilling silence where there should be noise, strange footprints at dawn, and the disappearance of pets that residents dismiss nervously with forced laughter. Rumors circulate, fear simmers, and the once tightly knit neighborhood begins to feel like a ticking maze of suspicion. People start locking doors they previously left open, glancing over shoulders as though expecting the unknown to materialize behind them. In the center of this unease is a protagonist, whose life was once defined by routine, a job that demanded precision, friendships established over years, and a sense of self rooted in predictability. This character is not a trained investigator nor a hardened survivor. They are an ordinary individual whose world slowly cracks open as events spiral outwards. What starts as curiosity transforms into a quest for understanding, and eventually into a desperate struggle with the existential terror of not knowing what lurks in shadows. The narrative pace is deliberate, allowing moments of silence to stretch just long enough that the audience becomes hyper-aware of every creaking floorboard and rustling leaf. Sound design plays a significant role, not by overwhelming viewers with discordant blasts, but by withholding sound where it would normally be expected. A quiet kitchen at midnight feels heavier than a screaming crowd because the absence of sound becomes its own presence, a space where the imagination fills the void with fear. The antagonist in Psycho Killer is not first defined by mask, weapon, or catchphrase. This entity, at least initially, is ambiguity, an unknown force whose motives and methods remain shrouded. The movie plays with the idea that terror doesn't always need a face. Sometimes it thrives in uncertainty. Sightings are fleeting and inconclusive, just long enough to suggest something is watching, waiting, and studying before dissolving back into nothing. This absence, the refusal to fully reveal itself, becomes more terrifying than any definitive form. As fear escalates within the community, paranoia grows. Neighbors start suspecting one another based on trivial cues: a look that lingered too long, a habit that felt unusual, a door left ajar. The protagonist, once trusting and grounded, begins to notice inconsistencies in people they thought they knew. Friendships become fraught with tension, conversations feel loaded with hidden meaning, and silence becomes more menacing than any spoken warning. The emotional core of the film lies in the protagonist's internal conflict. What does it mean to carry fear within your own thoughts? They begin to question whether the terror outside is worse than the terror inside their mind. Their sleep becomes fragmented, thoughts blur between reality and imagined possibilities, and every reflection in glass feels less like a mirror and more like an interface to something unknown. The film is as much about this psychological unraveling as it is about the external mystery itself. The supporting characters reflect different responses to fear. Some cling to denial, insisting everything will revert to normal if ignored. Others become obsessively analytical, convinced they can solve the pattern through logic alone. A few surrender to anxiety, producing reactions fueled by panic rather than precision. These contrasting behaviors create a tapestry of human response, denial, logic, fear, bravado, and desperation, showing that everyone carries a unique relationship with anxiety and danger. One of the most unsettling aspects of Psycho Killer is how it frames the unknown as an echo chamber of self-doubt. The antagonist, or whatever force the protagonist is pursuing, becomes a mirror. The deeper the protagonist digs, the more they discover about their own unresolved fears, loss, isolation, regret, and the fragile nature of trust. This introspection turns every shadow into a question, every whisper into an accusation. Is the horror external, or has the protagonist carried it within themselves all along? The film builds to a tense midpoint where a breakthrough moment occurs, not a full revelation, but a hint that there may be a pattern to the chaos. A series of clues, seemingly unrelated at first, begin to form a disquieting mosaic. Oddly placed objects, repeated phrases overheard in snippets of conversation, and recurring imagery converging in dreams and waking thoughts suggest a connection that is both intellectual and emotional. This moment feels less like relief and more like crossing a threshold, once seen. The pattern cannot be unseen. Tension escalates further as this discovery draws the protagonist into deeper danger. Nights lose their innocence, shadows no longer carry the comfort of stillness, and silence becomes a stage upon which every fear feels amplified. The town's atmosphere shifts palpably. Even the air feels heavier, as though charged by unspoken dread. Every step outside feels like stepping into a place that once was familiar, but now feels foreign. In one of the film's more haunting sequences, the protagonist finds themselves alone in an environment that should feel safe, a home, a workplace, a childhood room, only to discover that the space has subtly changed. Furniture feels displaced, colors in the carpet appear skewed, a familiar photograph seems altered. These visual disturbances are small but psychologically destabilizing, conveying that nothing is static when fear is allowed to roam freely within the mind. The antagonist reveals themselves not through dramatic confrontation, but through chilling subtlety. Instead of a monstrous transformation or dramatic entrance, their presence is implied through synchronized events that defy coincidence. A series of moments, a light flickering at precise intervals, a melody that repeats at uncanny times. Recurring numbers suggest a pattern that feels intentional, as if the antagonist thrives not on brute terror but on psychological manipulation. The horror here is intellectual as much as visceral. The climax unfolds as a confrontation of mind, and will rather than pure physical danger. The protagonist realizes that to confront the psycho killer, whether literal, symbolic, or psychological, they must face their own fears directly. This battle is not fought with weapons or adrenaline alone. It is a war waged in memory, in choice, and in courage. The environment around them becomes a reflection of their internal landscape, fractured geometry. Shifting walls, echoes that question reality. In this confrontation, the protagonist's understanding of fear, identity, and morality evolves. They begin to see that terror is not something to be conquered outright, but something to be understood, integrated, and met with clarity rather than panic. The antagonist, whether person, projection, or internal force, loses power as the protagonist stops fleeing and starts observing. Fear, when named and recognized, becomes less a monster and more a teacher revealing hidden truths about survival and self-awareness. The final moments avoid dramatic spectacle. Instead, they deliver a calm yet profound resolution, a recognition that the world remains uncertain. Unpredictability is inevitable, but one's response to fear shapes every step forward. The protagonist emerges not triumphant in the traditional sense, but steady, aware, and unshaken by silence that once felt overwhelming. Their gaze carries a clarity born of having faced the unknown and chosen to walk through it knowingly rather than blindly. The emotional resonance of Psycho Killer lies not in the external horror alone, but in how it mirrors the internal experiences of anxiety, doubt, and self-examination that every viewer recognizes. The story reminds us that fear can be a companion and a challenge, and that confronting the darkness within is sometimes more revealing than confronting the shadows beyond. In doing so, the film transcends standard horror tropes and becomes a psychological exploration that lingers long after the screen goes dark. A cinematic echo that asks not just who is the killer, but what lives inside every mind when fear takes shape.